They say a single decision can change a life forever. But on the coldest night Cedar Hollow had seen in 30 years, 8-year-old Lily Carter had no idea that opening her front door would change far more than her own. Snow hammered the small mountain town like waves crashing against a rocky shore. The storm had arrived before sunset, swallowing roads, burying mailboxes, and turning familiar streets into endless fields of white. By 9 o'clock, most people had locked their doors, drawn their curtains, and settled in for a long night of waiting. The wind howled through the pine trees surrounding the Carter house, rattling the old wooden walls and making the windows tremble in their frames. Inside, the tiny home felt warm but fragile, like a candle trying to stay lit in the middle of a hurricane. Lily sat cross-legged on a faded rug near the fireplace, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The orange glow of the flames danced across her pale face as she turned another page in a worn library book. Across the room, her grandmother Evelyn rested in an old rocking chair, knitting quietly beneath a yellow lamp. The television had lost signal hours ago. The internet was down. The storm had cut Cedar Hollow off from the rest of the world. For most children, that might have felt frightening. For Lily, it felt familiar. Ever since the accident that had taken her parents 3 years earlier, loneliness had become a silent companion she carried everywhere. She rarely complained about it. She rarely talked about it. But some nights, especially when the world outside felt dark and endless, she missed them so much that her chest ached. She missed her father's laugh. She missed the way her mother tucked her in every night. Most of all, she missed feeling certain that everything would be okay. A sudden gust slammed against the house. The front porch creaked. Lily glanced toward the window. Beyond the frosted glass, snow swirled so thickly that she could barely see the fence 20 feet away. "That storm's getting worse," Evelyn said softly, setting down her knitting. "Probably the worst one since '98. Lily nodded and returned her eyes to the book, but something felt different. Something she couldn't explain. The house suddenly seemed quieter. Even the crackling fire sounded distant. Then it came. Knock. The sound was faint, almost lost, beneath the screaming wind. Lily froze. Evelyn looked up immediately. Both of them listened. For several seconds, there was nothing. Just the storm. Just the wind. Then came another knock. Louder this time. 3 slow thuds against the front door. Lily's heartbeat quickened. Nobody visited during storms like this. Nobody. Most of the town was already sheltering indoors. Anyone outside in weather this severe would be risking their life. Evelyn slowly stood from her chair. "Stay here, sweetheart." But Lily was already on her feet. Curiosity pulled her forward despite the fear building inside her stomach. Together they moved toward the front hallway. The knocking came again. Slower now. Weaker somehow. As though whoever stood outside had little strength left. Lily reached the narrow window beside the door first. Frost covered most of the glass. She wiped away a small circle with her sleeve and peered into the darkness. At first she saw nothing except blowing snow. Then a shape emerged. A massive figure stood on the porch. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black leather covered with snow. One hand pressed against the wooden railing. The other rested against the doorframe. Even through the storm, Lily could see that he was struggling to remain standing. Her breath caught in her throat. Across the back of his weathered leather vest was a patch she recognized immediately. She had seen pictures before, heard stories from people around town. Stories whispered in diners and grocery stores whenever motorcycles rolled through Cedar Hollow during summer. Hell's Angels. The man lifted his head slightly. Snow clung to his gray beard. His face looked exhausted. His eyes seemed distant. And then, before Lily could move or speak, the stranger swayed once, stumbled forward, and collapsed onto the porch just outside her door. For a moment, neither Lily nor Evelyn moved. The storm continued to rage outside, shaking the porch light until its pale beam flickered across the snow-covered steps. The man remained motionless where he had fallen, one large arm stretched across the wooden boards. Snow immediately began collecting on his leather vest and broad shoulders. Lily felt her stomach twist. Up close, he looked even larger than he had through the frosted glass. "Grandma," she whispered. Evelyn stared through the window, concern replacing the caution that had filled her face moments earlier. "Good Lord, She unlocked the door and pushed it open just enough for the wind to burst inside. Freezing air swept across the hallway, carrying snowflakes that danced through the light like tiny crystals. Lily shivered. Together, they stepped onto the porch. The man was breathing, but only barely. His beard was coated with ice. His hands looked stiff from the cold. Even through the layers of clothing, Lily could see exhaustion written across every part of him. Evelyn knelt carefully beside him. "Sir," she called. "Can you hear me?" The stranger's eyelids fluttered. For a brief second, his eyes opened. They were a deep gray, tired and distant, yet strangely calm. He looked from Evelyn to Lily as if trying to make sense of where he was. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice rough and weak. Did not mean to cause trouble. The word surprised Lily. He did not sound dangerous. He sounded tired. Very tired. Evelyn touched his shoulder gently. "You need to get inside." He gave a faint shake of his head. "No, I can keep moving." A gust of wind answered him immediately, strong enough to force everyone to brace themselves. Even Lily could tell he was not going anywhere. "You cannot," Evelyn said firmly. "Not in this weather." The man closed his eyes again. For several seconds he did not speak. Finally he let out a slow breath. "Guess you might be right." It took both Evelyn and Lily several minutes to help him into the house. He tried to carry most of his own weight, but every step looked difficult. Once inside, the warmth from the fireplace wrapped around him. Snow melted from his jacket and dripped onto the wooden floor. The man paused near the doorway, looking almost embarrassed by the attention. Lily studied him carefully. The story she had heard about bikers described loud, angry men who frightened people. This man did not look angry. He looked worn down by a very long journey. His leather vest carried road dust beneath the snow. The patch on his back showed years of use. His boots were scuffed. His face carried lines that seemed carved by time itself. Evelyn guided him toward an old armchair near the fire. As he lowered himself into the seat, he let out a quiet sigh of relief. The flames reflected in his tired eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Most people would have left me out there." Lily sat quietly on the rug nearby, unable to stop staring. "What is your name?" she finally asked. The man looked at her. For the first time, a hint of warmth appeared in his expression. "Mason Walker." His voice was stronger now. "Some people call me Steel." Lily blinked. "Steel." One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Long story." Evelyn disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later carrying a steaming mug. Mason accepted it with both hands. The heat seemed to bring life back into his fingers. He stared into the rising steam for a moment before taking a careful sip. The simple act made him look almost human in a way Lily had not expected. Not a biker, not a stranger, just a man trying to get warm. "You are not from Cedar Hollow," Evelyn observed. Mason shook his head. "Passing through. In a blizzard?" Lily asked. Mason chuckled softly. It sounded rusty, as if he had not laughed in a long time. It was not part of the plan. For the first time that night, Lily smiled. Outside, the storm continued to roar against the house. Inside, the fire crackled steadily. The room felt smaller now, filled with an unexpected sense of quiet. Then, as Mason adjusted his jacket near the fire, something slipped from an inside pocket and landed on the floor beside the chair. A photograph. Lily picked it up before he noticed. The image showed a younger Mason standing beside a smiling little girl about her age. The happiness in his face was so different that Lily almost did not recognize him. Then she turned the photograph over and read the handwritten name on the back. Emily Walker. The room seemed to grow quieter the moment Lily spoke the name out loud. Emily Walker. Mason froze. The steaming mug stopped halfway to his lips. For a second, the fire crackled and the wind rattled the windows, but neither sound felt as loud as the silence that followed. Lily immediately wondered if she had done something wrong. She looked down at the photograph again. The little girl in the picture had bright eyes and a smile that seemed capable of lighting an entire room. Standing beside her, the younger version of Mason looked different too. His shoulders appeared lighter somehow. His eyes carried a happiness Lily had not seen since he arrived. Slowly, Mason lowered the mug and extended his hand. "May I see that?" Lily nodded and carefully passed him the photograph. He studied it for several seconds. His expression softened in a way that made him look older and younger at the same time. Older because of the sadness in his eyes. younger because of the love that still lived there. Evelyn noticed the change immediately. She sat quietly, giving him space. Finally, Mason let out a long breath. That was my daughter. Lily shifted closer on the rug. She looks nice. A faint smile touched Mason's face. She was. The answer was simple, but the emotion behind it filled the room. Lily knew that feeling. She recognized it because she carried it herself. Missing someone never really went away. It simply became a part of you. Outside, another blast of wind struck the house. Snow slid from the roof with a heavy thump. Mason stared into the fire. She loved winter, he said quietly. Every time it snowed, she would drag me outside before sunrise. Said she wanted to be the first person to leave footprints in fresh snow. Lily smiled. I used to do that with my dad. Mason looked at her. Did you? She nodded. He always pretended I was winning a race, even when I started late. For the first time, Mason's smile reached his eyes. Sounds like a good father. Lily lowered her gaze. He was. The warmth in the room suddenly felt different. Less like strangers sharing shelter, and more like people sharing memories. Then Evelyn stood and walked toward the hallway. I'm going to get extra blankets, she said gently. You two stay by the fire. Once she disappeared, silence returned. Not an uncomfortable silence, just a quiet one. Lily hugged her knees. Do you have other family? She asked. Mason looked back at the photograph. Not anymore. His answer carried no bitterness, only truth. Lily hesitated. Me neither. Their eyes met. In that moment, something unexpected passed between them. Understanding. Not because their lives were identical. They were not. One was an 8-year-old girl. The other was a weathered biker who had spent decades on the road. But both knew what it felt like to miss someone every day. Both knew what it felt like to wish they could hear a familiar voice one more time. A loud crack of thunder echoed somewhere in the mountains. The lights flickered briefly. Lily glanced toward the dark windows. The storm seemed stronger than ever. Were you scared? She asked suddenly. Mason blinked. Of what? Being out there alone. For several seconds, he considered the question. Then he surprised her. Yes. Lily had not expected that answer. Adults usually pretended they were never afraid. Especially men who looked like Mason. Really? She asked. He nodded. Everybody gets scared sometimes. Lily thought about that. Even bikers? A quiet chuckle escaped him. Especially bikers. That made her laugh. The sound filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Mason looked genuinely pleased to hear it. Then his expression changed slightly as he glanced toward the front window. Something beyond the glass had caught his attention. The smile disappeared. His eyes narrowed. Lily followed his gaze, but all she could see was darkness and swirling snow. What is it? She asked. Mason remained silent for a moment. Then he slowly rose from the chair despite his exhaustion. The warmth that had returned to his face vanished. Nothing, he said, though his voice suggested otherwise. Probably nothing. But as he continued staring into the storm beyond the window, Lily could not shake the feeling that whatever had brought Mason Walker to her doorstep had not been left behind in the blizzard. The wind continued to batter the house, but inside the living room the fire burned steadily, casting long golden shadows across the walls. Mason remained standing near the window for another moment before finally turning back toward the warmth. Whatever he thought he had seen outside seemed to fade from his mind as his eyes landed on the photograph still resting in his hand. He stared at it quietly. Lily watched him from the rug. She had seen adults become sad before, but this felt different. It was not the sadness of a bad day or a disappointment. It was the kind that had lived inside someone for a very long time. Mason slowly lowered himself back into the armchair. The leather creaked beneath his weight. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Lily gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been sitting in her heart ever since she saw the picture. What was Emily like? Mason blinked as if the question had pulled him back from somewhere far away. His eyes moved to the smiling little girl in the photograph. At first, Lily thought he might refuse to answer. Instead, a faint smile appeared. She talked too much. Lily grinned. Really? All day long? Mason nodded. She could ask 100 questions before breakfast. Lily laughed softly. I ask a lot of questions, too. I noticed. The smile remained for a moment before slowly fading. Mason traced a thumb across the edge of the photograph. She loved animals, loved snow, loved hot chocolate with way too many marshmallows. His voice grew quieter. She could turn the worst day into a good one without even trying. Lily listened carefully. The more Mason spoke, the more alive Emily seemed to become. She could almost picture the girl running through fresh snow or laughing beside the fireplace. "She sounds nice," Lily said. Mason nodded. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me." The room fell silent again. Evelyn returned carrying extra blankets and immediately sensed the change in the atmosphere. She placed the blankets beside the chair without interrupting. Mason stared into the flames. The firelight reflected in his eyes. Then Lily noticed something unexpected. His eyes were glistening. The giant biker who looked strong enough to lift a motorcycle by himself suddenly seemed very fragile. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to set down. "Do you miss her every day?" Lily asked gently. Mason closed his eyes. For several seconds, he did not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded rough. "Every single day." The honesty of the answer hung in the room. Lily felt her chest tighten. She understood that feeling better than most children her age ever should. "I miss my mom and dad every day too," she admitted. Mason opened his eyes and looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a while. They did not need to. Sometimes the people who understand your pain best are the ones who have lived through something similar. The fire popped softly. Snow scraped against the windows. Somewhere deep within the storm, the town slept. Mason carefully placed the photograph back into his jacket pocket. "Emily would have liked you." Lily blinked. "You think so?" "I know so." For the first time all evening, the sadness in his face softened into something warmer, something closer to peace. Then Evelyn walked toward the kitchen and returned carrying a small tray with soup and bread. The smell immediately filled the room. Mason looked genuinely surprised. "You do not have to do all this." Evelyn smiled. "In this house, nobody goes hungry during a storm." Mason glanced at Lily, then back at Evelyn. For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to say something important, something he had not said in years. Instead, he simply nodded. "Thank you." But as he reached for the bowl, a distant sound drifted through the storm outside. It was faint, almost impossible to hear beneath the wind. Mason froze instantly. His head lifted. His expression changed. The warmth vanished from his face. He slowly turned toward the dark window once more. This time Lily heard it too. Somewhere beyond the swirling snow, far down the road, an engine was approaching. The distant engine sound lingered for several seconds before fading back into the storm. Mason remained still, listening carefully. Then he slowly relaxed. "Probably somebody trying to get home before the roads disappear completely," he said, though his voice carried a trace of uncertainty. Evelyn set the tray on a small table beside him. "Then let us hope they make it safely." Mason nodded and finally picked up the spoon. The warmth of the soup seemed to bring some color back into his face. Lily watched him eat, surprised by how ordinary the moment felt. A few hours earlier, she had been reading by the fire during a snowstorm. Now a biker everyone in town would probably avoid was sitting in her living room sharing dinner. Life could change quickly. Outside, the blizzard continued to roar, but inside the little house the atmosphere felt calmer than it had all evening. The fire crackled steadily. The scent of fresh bread filled the room. Shadows danced softly across the walls. For the first time since Mason arrived, nobody seemed worried about the storm. Lily pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and settled onto the rug again. "Tell me about the road," she said. Mason looked up from his bowl. "The road. You have probably been everywhere." A faint smile appeared. "Not everywhere. More places than me." Mason laughed quietly. "That is probably true." Lily's eyes brightened. "What is the most beautiful place you ever saw?" Mason leaned back slightly as he considered the question. "There's a stretch of highway in Montana where the mountains look endless. At sunrise, the peaks turn gold. You can ride for miles and not see another person." Lily listened as if he were describing another planet. "Did Emily go with you?" The question caught him off guard, but this time the sadness that crossed his face was gentler. "Sometimes." He stared into the flames. "She loved road trips. She would point out every animal she saw. Deer, eagles, even squirrels." Lily giggled. "I would do that too. I figured." The smile lingered. Then Mason surprised himself by continuing. "One summer we rode all the way to Wyoming. She spent an hour trying to convince me that every cloud looked like an animal." "Did any of them?" Lily asked. One looked like a turtle. Lily laughed, so hard she nearly dropped her blanket. The sound filled the room. Evelyn smiled from her chair, without saying a word. For a few moments, the years seemed to fall away from Mason. The heavy sadness he carried every day loosened its grip. He was no longer a tired traveler, trapped by a storm. He was simply a father remembering his daughter. Lily noticed it too. You smile differently when you talk about her. Mason looked surprised. Doi. Yes. He glanced down at the photograph, still resting beside him. Maybe that is because she gave me most of my best memories. The room grew quiet again. Not sad. Thoughtful. Lily stared into the fire. My dad used to tell stories before bed. Mason listened. What kind? Adventure stories. He always changed the ending. What? Lily shrugged. He said every story deserved a second chance. Something about those words struck Mason deeply. His expression softened. Your father sounds like a wise man. Lily smiled. He was. For several minutes they traded stories. Lily spoke about camping trips with her parents before the accident, about learning how to skip stones on a lake, about baking cookies that always came out uneven. Mason shared memories from the road. Small towns, friendly strangers, sunrises seen from lonely highways. The conversation flowed naturally, as though they had known each other much longer than a few hours. Eventually Lily yawned. The long evening was beginning to catch up with her. Evelyn noticed immediately. I think someone is getting tired. Lily rubbed her eyes. Maybe a little. Mason chuckled softly. That might be the first honest answer from a kid in history. Lily laughed again. Then another sound drifted through the storm outside. This time it was louder. Clearer. Not one engine. Several. Mason's smile vanished instantly. His eyes moved toward the dark window. The warmth in the room remained, but a cold feeling settled quietly into his chest. Whatever was out, that was getting closer. The sound grew steadily louder until there was no mistaking it. Multiple engines were moving through the storm. Their low rumble drifted across the snow-covered hills like distant thunder. Lily sat upright immediately. Evelyn looked toward the window. Mason did not move. His expression had become unreadable. The warmth that had filled the room only minutes earlier seemed to retreat into the corners of the house. Outside, the blizzard continued to erase the world beyond the glass. Do you know them? Lily asked quietly. Mason took several seconds before answering. I hope not. The reply sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the weather. Evelyn folded her hands together. What does that mean? Mason stared into the darkness beyond the window. A few weeks ago, I got involved in something that was not really my business. Lily frowned. What happened? Mason let out a slow breath. An old veteran was being taken advantage of by some people who thought nobody would stand up for him. His voice remained calm, but Lily could tell the memory bothered him. He was losing everything he had worked for. His house, his savings. Nobody wanted to help because nobody wanted trouble. So you helped him? Lily asked. Mason nodded. I did what I could. And they did not like that. He gave a faint smile. No, they did not. Another engine joined the others outside. The sound seemed closer now. Much closer. Snow swirled across the front yard in thick white waves. Visibility could not have been more than 20 feet. Mason slowly stood from the chair. His body was still recovering from the cold, but the protective instinct in his eyes had fully returned. I should not have come here. Do not say that. Evelyn replied immediately. You needed help. Mason shook his head. That is exactly the problem. Lily looked confused. Why? Mason glanced at her. Because sometimes trouble follows people. The answer did not make her feel better. Outside, headlights briefly appeared through the storm before vanishing behind a curtain of snow. They were far away, but definitely moving in the direction of the house. Mason noticed them too. His jaw tightened. Evelyn rose from her chair. Are we in danger? For a moment, Mason seemed to choose his words carefully. I do not think so. Then he added honestly, but I am not completely sure. The room fell silent. The fire crackled softly. Wind pushed against the walls. Lily looked at the giant biker standing near the window. Hours earlier, he had been a stranger lying in the snow. Now, she realized he was trying very hard to protect them from something he barely understood himself. You helped somebody because it was the right thing to do, she said. Mason looked surprised. That does not sound like trouble. A small smile touched his face. Your grandmother raised you to think like that. My parents did too. The smile lingered for only a second before another flash of light appeared outside. This time all three of them saw it. Headlights. Definitely headlights. Moving slowly through the storm. Mason stepped away from the window immediately. Listen carefully, he said. His voice remained calm, but it carried an urgency Lily had not heard before. If anybody comes to this door, you stay behind me. Mason, Evelyn began. He shook his head. Please. The sincerity in his eyes stopped her. He was not afraid for himself. He was worried about them. Lily felt something shift inside her. The giant biker who everyone would judge by his leather vest and weathered appearance was standing there thinking only about keeping two strangers safe. Outside, the engines continued their slow approach through the blizzard. Then, without warning, they stopped. Complete silence settled across the snowy landscape. No engines. No movement. Nothing except the wind. Mason stared toward the darkness. Every instinct in his body seemed focused on whatever waited beyond the storm. And then came 3 slow knocks against the front door. The 3 knocks echoed through the house and then disappeared into the storm. Nobody moved. The wind pressed against the walls while snow rattled softly across the windows. Mason stood between the front door and the rest of the room, his broad frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. Lily could feel her heartbeat in her ears. Whoever was outside had somehow made it through one of the worst blizzards Cedar Hollow had seen in decades. That alone felt unsettling. Another knock came. This time was softer, almost patient. Mason glanced toward Evelyn and Lily. Stay back. His voice remained calm, but there was a firmness to it that left no room for argument. Evelyn slowly stepped closer to Lily and rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Mason moved toward the door. Every step seemed deliberate. The giant biker who had spent most of the evening sharing memories and stories now looked different. Not colder, not angry, protective, like someone carrying responsibility he had never asked for but would never abandon. He reached the door and paused. Who is it? He called. For a moment there was no answer. Only the storm. Then a voice came through the wood. Easy, Steele. We are not here for trouble. Mason closed his eyes briefly. The tension in his shoulders shifted, not disappearing completely, but changing. He recognized the voice. What are you doing here? He asked. A faint laugh came from outside. Try not to freeze to death. Mason hesitated before unlocking the door. The moment it opened, a blast of icy air rushed inside. 3 men stood on the porch, covered in snow from head to toe. Their heavy winter jackets and road-worn faces suggested they had traveled a long distance through terrible weather. They looked exhausted. More importantly, they looked relieved. The oldest among them shook snow from his hat and smiled. There you are. Mason stared at them in disbelief. You followed me through a blizzard? You disappeared without a word. Another man replied. Somebody had to make sure you're still breathing. Lily studied them carefully. They looked rough around the edges, but there was something familiar in the way they looked at Mason. Concern, loyalty, friendship, the same way family might look at one another. Mason stepped aside and allowed them inside. The men immediately thanked Evelyn for the shelter. Their manner surprised Lily. They spoke respectfully. They removed their snow-covered gloves near the door. One even apologized for tracking slush across the floor. It was not what she expected at all. The oldest man eventually noticed Lily watching from the living room. His weathered face softened immediately. You must be the young lady who saved our friend. Lily blinked. I did not save him. Pretty sure you did. He smiled warmly. If he stayed out there much longer, we would not have found him in time. Mason shook his head. Do not start. The man laughed. Just telling the truth. As everyone settled near the fireplace, the tension that had filled the house slowly began to fade. The visitors explained that they had been searching for Mason ever since the storm worsened. When his phone stopped working, they became worried. One road closure after another had delayed them, but they kept going. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Lily listened quietly. She had spent years wondering what it meant to belong somewhere. Watching these men speak to one another, she began to understand. It was not about patches or motorcycles. It was about showing up when somebody needed you. Outside, the storm continued to roar across the mountains. Inside, the little house felt warmer than ever. Yet as Mason looked around the room, at Evelyn, at Lily, and at the friends who had crossed a blizzard to find him, a strange expression appeared on his face. It was not sadness. It was not relief. It was something closer to realization, as though he was beginning to understand that this unexpected night was changing more than he had ever imagined. By the time the first pale light appeared beyond the mountains, the storm had finally begun to loosen its grip on Cedar Hollow. Snow still covered everything in sight, transforming the town into a world of white and silver. But the fierce winds of the night before had faded into little more than a cold whisper. Inside the house, Lily stirred awake beneath a blanket near the fireplace. For a moment, she forgot about the blizzard, the unexpected visitors, and the giant biker who had arrived at her door. Then she smelled fresh coffee and heard quiet voices drifting from the kitchen. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. Mason was already awake. So were the three men who had arrived during the night. Evelyn stood at the stove preparing breakfast while everyone talked in low voices. The atmosphere felt strangely peaceful. Safer somehow. Lily smiled as she climbed to her feet. "Morning, kiddo," one of the visitors said warmly. "Morning," she replied. Mason glanced toward her and smiled. It was the same smile she had seen whenever he spoke about Emily. The sight made her unexpectedly happy. Then a distant sound reached the house. A low rumble. At first Lily thought it might be thunder, but the sky was clear. The sound continued growing. Deeper, stronger, more engines. Lots of them. Everyone in the room paused. One of Mason's friends walked toward the window and looked outside. His eyebrows immediately shot upward. "Well," he said softly, "looks like word traveled faster than I thought." Mason stood and joined him. Lily hurried over. Beyond the front yard, a long line of headlights was emerging through the snowy road that wound down from mountains. One motorcycle appeared, then another, then another, and another. The line seemed endless. The sound filled the valley. Deep, steady, powerful. Lily's eyes widened. "How many are there?" she whispered. Nobody answered immediately, because nobody seemed completely sure. The motorcycles rolled slowly into town. Residents began stepping onto porches and peering through windows. Curtains moved. Front doors opened. Within minutes, people from all over Cedar Hollow were standing outside, staring in disbelief. The procession continued growing. Riders filled the road for what looked like miles. Hundreds of motorcycles moved together through the snow-covered streets. Yet there was no chaos. No anger. No intimidación. Only purpose. The riders eventually reached the Carter house and began parking neatly along both sides of the road. Engines shut down one after another until an incredible silence settled over the valley. Lily stared in amazement. She had never seen anything like it. Men and women climbed from their motorcycles, removing helmets and greeting one another warmly. Some carried supplies. Others carried boxes. A few carried bags of groceries. Mason looked completely stunned. "They came," one of his friends said quietly. "Looks that way." "All of them." "Looks that way too." A tall rider approached the front porch and removed his gloves. "Morning, Steele." Mason shook his head. "You drove through all that weather?" The man laughed. "After we heard what happened?" "Of course." More riders gathered nearby. Several glanced toward Lily, standing beside the window. Their expressions immediately softened. "That is her," one woman asked. Mason nodded. "That is Lily." The woman smiled warmly. "Then we owe her a thank you." As the morning unfolded, the surprise only grew larger. Riders unloaded firewood, food, blankets, and supplies. Others helped clear snow from driveways throughout the neighborhood. Several elderly residents who had been trapped by the storm suddenly found dozens of willing hands ready to help. Cedar Hollow watched in disbelief as the people they had expected to. Fear spent the morning helping complete strangers. Lily stood on the porch beside Mason, watching it all happen. The giant biker looked out across the crowd of riders and then down at the little girl who had opened her door the night before. His eyes glistened slightly. "You know something, Lily?" She looked up. "What?" Mason smiled. "I think you reminded a lot of people what really matters." The transformation of Cedar Hollow did not end when the snow stopped falling. Throughout the day, the riders continued helping wherever they were needed. Some repaired damaged fences buried beneath drifting snow. Others cleared driveways for elderly residents who could not manage the heavy accumulation on their own. Several worked on the Carter house itself, replacing loose shingles, reinforcing sections of the porch, and fixing problems that had gone untouched for years simply because Evelyn could not afford the repairs. By afternoon, the little house looked stronger than it had in a very long time. Lily stood near the front steps, watching everything unfold with amazement. It felt less like a town recovering from a storm and more like a community gathering for a celebration. Laughter drifted through the cold air. Neighbors who rarely spoke to one another shared coffee and conversation. Children played in the snow, while motorcycles lined the streets like silent guardians. The walls people had built in their minds about who belonged and who did not seem to melt away with the ice. Mason spent most of the day helping wherever he could, but every so often Lily would catch him looking toward the house. Looking toward her, not in a sad way, not like someone remembering what had been lost, more like someone discovering something he never expected to find again. As the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, golden light spilled across the snow-covered valley. The entire town glowed beneath the evening sky. One by one, the riders gathered near their motorcycles, preparing for the long journey home. The day had passed quickly. Too quickly. Lily suddenly realized she did not want it to end. She stood quietly beside the porch railing as Mason approached. His heavy boots crunched softly against the snow. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the sunset together. "Looks like the roads will be safe by morning," Mason said. Lily nodded, though her heart felt strangely heavy. "I guess so." Mason glanced down at her. Most people would not have opened that door." Lily looked at the snowy ground. "Grandma always says if someone needs help, you help them." Mason smiled. "Your grandmother is a smart woman." A few seconds passed before he reached into his jacket pocket. Carefully, he pulled out the photograph of Emily. He looked at it one more time before sliding it back into place. Last night was the first time in years that talking about her did not hurt quite so much. Lily looked up. Mason's eyes reflected the fading sunlight. "Thank you for that." Before she could answer, Evelyn stepped onto the porch carrying a small wrapped package. "This belongs to you," she said. Mason opened it and found a hand-knitted scarf. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. "Evelyn, a proper thank you," she said warmly. Mason carefully ran his fingers across the scarf before nodding. His eyes glistened again. Nearby, engines slowly began coming to life. Riders waved goodbye. The time had come. Lily felt a lump form in her throat. Mason noticed immediately. He crouched slightly, so they were eye level. "Hey," he said softly. "This is not goodbye." Lily blinked. "It is not." Mason shook his head. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Then he reached into another pocket and handed her a small metal keychain shaped like a motorcycle. "So you do not forget me." Lily smiled through watery eyes. "I cannot forget you." Mason laughed quietly. "Good, because I plan on checking in." As darkness settled over Cedar Hollow, the riders finally departed. One by one, their headlights disappeared down the mountain road. Yet somehow the town did not feel emptier afterward. It felt fuller, warmer, changed. Lily stood beside her grandmother, watching the last motorcycle vanish into the distance. The house behind them was stronger. The future ahead seemed brighter. And for the first time since losing her parents, the world felt a little less lonely. Because on the coldest night of the year, she had opened her door to a stranger. By the next evening, she had gained something she never expected. Not just a friend, not just a protector, but a family that would always know the way back home.